Imagine a world where Ukraine lost the war. A world where Ukraine's leaders live in exile, scattered across Europe. The Ukrainian flag is now banned in Kyiv. The capital is now spelled Kyiv at Moscow's instruction, and Ukraine is governed by a Kremlin-appointed puppet administration. The resistance exists, but is being hunted ruthlessly. Ukrainian culture, history, and identity are being systematically erased. Now we are in Paris. Year 2033. A decade has passed since the fall of Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelenskyy is living in exile. To some, he remains a hero. To others, he is a symbol of a failed state, abandoned by its allies. This morning, like many others, he enjoyed breakfast at his usual cafe. He paid his bill, and on the way home, he stopped near a bookstore to browse the latest releases. A voice called out, "Are you Zelenskyy?" He barely had time to react before the first shot rang out. The bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him slightly. Before he could regain his footing, 3 more shots followed in a rapid succession. His chin, his stomach. The final, fatal round hit his chest. As he collapsed onto the pavement, 2 additional bullets shattered the cobblestone beneath him. The last round jammed in the chamber. Bystanders screamed. Emergency service arrived, but it was too late. Volodymyr Zelenskyy was dead at 55. Authorities quickly apprehended the assassin, a man from eastern Ukraine. In custody, he declared Zelenskyy as Nazi, stating the murder was an act of revenge for his crimes against Ukraine. His words echoed Kremlin's propaganda that had for years painted Zelenskyy as a Nazi and the enemy of his own people. Then some of the world's most famous people, such as Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, signed an open letter supporting the claim that Zelenskyy was a Nazi, suggesting that his assassination was justified. The French government, eager to repair its fractured relationship with Moscow, moved to sweep the case under the rug. Under political pressure, the court ruled in record times. The assassin was sentenced not to prison, but to a fine. €1 for staining the pavement. He walked free the same day. The world gasped, but it did not act. Diplomacy and pragmatism won over justice. The dream of a free Ukraine, a country for which countless lives were lost, now seemed like a distant memory. The scenario that I just described sounds appalling and surreal, but to me the worst is to realize that this exact scenario has actually happened in the past. Ukraine has already had its Zelenskyy-type leader, and the world wasn't kind to him. Symon Petliura, Ukraine's Zelenskyy of World War I, was a leader who fought for Ukrainian independence in the wake of the collapse of the Russian Empire. Russia, I remind you, lost the First World War and signed its capitulation on March 3rd, 1918. This agreement, known as Brest-Litovsk Treaty, recognized the independence of Ukraine. Russia lost Poland, Finland, Baltic states, and Ukraine. But then Germany fell, and Russia seized the moment and tried to conquer these territories back. The Western powers at the Versailles Treaty turned their back on Ukraine's independence, choosing diplomacy with Moscow over supporting Ukraine's fight for freedom. Betrayed and left without international backing, Petliura would eventually lose his war, and in early 1920s, he went into exile in Paris. Later, on May 25th, 1926, as Petliura walked through the streets of Paris, a Russian agent, Shalom Schwarzbart, approached him and fired 7 bullets. Petliura collapsed and died at 47. What followed was a travesty of justice. Schwarzbart claimed to have killed Petliura in revenge for Jewish pogroms in Ukraine. His defense, led by the renowned lawyer Andrea Torres, turned his trial into an indictment of Petliura rather than his assassin. Suddenly, Schwarzbart was no longer a murderer, he was painted as a righteous avenger. Even Albert Einstein himself signed a letter supporting the murderer. Moscow has achieved more than just eliminating Petliura. It successfully stained his name and, by extension, the entire Ukrainian national movement. The narrative of Petliura as an anti-Semite spread worldwide, despite the reality that pogroms in Ukraine were committed by nearly all military factions at that time. Petliura himself publicly condemned these atrocities and took measures to stop them. Yet Bolshevik propaganda persistently blamed him for that. The same strategy was used again in 1938. The leader of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, Yevhen Konovalets, was assassinated by a Soviet agent in Rotterdam. The murderer brought a box of chocolate laced with explosives. The trusted contact who handed him the chocolate turned out to be a Soviet spy. Then, in 1959, history repeated itself once more. Stepan Bandera, depicted by the Soviet propaganda as a Nazi, was killed in Munich. The assassin used a specifically designed cyanide gas pistol, a weapon developed specifically for covert assassinations by the KGB. Bandera's death mirrored those before him, a carefully planned execution by Moscow's hand in European cities. These were not isolated incidents, they were part of a systematic policy. The Russians have always pursued the destruction of Ukrainian cultural and political leaders, both at home and in exile. From Petliura to Konovalets, from Bandera to Victoria Amelina, killed in Kramatorsk on July 1st, 2023. The goal remains the same: to ensure that Ukrainian statehood and identity never rise again. And if Ukraine falls, like it did a century ago, the killings will not stop. Zelenskyy, Zelenskyy, and any future leader of Ukraine will face the same fate. Moscow's message is clear: Ukrainians who resist will be hunted no matter where they are. History has shown us what happens when Ukraine stands alone. The question is, will the world let it happen again? Will you let Ukraine fall again? Please continue supporting Ukraine politically and financially. Find your trusted charity and keep donating. It makes a huge difference. Thank you for your support.